In today's opening interview, I will be talking to Alex Manners, a boy with a very interesting story to tell.
I'm Mike Wallace. I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Dan Woodstra.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Leslie Stahl. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
All right. I'm Dan Woodstra, and I'm here with Alex Manners. Alex, how about you tell us something about yourself?
Well, it's good to be here.
Glad to have you.
And you want to know something about me? I'm an Aston Villa fan, huge soccer fan.
Interesting. Soccer. You don't usually hear that from someone from America. Is there a story behind that? Or?
Well, yeah, I actually spent a lot of my life overseas. I lived in various places in the world up until I was in 3rd, 4th grade.
Really?
So, yeah, it was a
interesting experience. So where exactly did you live outside the United States?
I lived in Amman, Jordan. I lived in Egypt. I've lived in Czechoslovakia, Prague. I've lived in England, Cyprus. I was born in West Berlin. Tons of places around the world.
Why? I gotta ask. I mean, did your parents just like to move around?
No, my dad was actually chief of operations for the CIA in the Middle East.
Oh. Where did you live the longest? You mentioned all those places. Did you stay? Did you settle down at all in any of them?
I lived the longest in Amman, Jordan. Okay. It was about 3 years spent there, maybe a little more, and we moved back to America right after that. But that was the most substantial period of time I spent in a single country. And it was probably the greatest place I've actually been in, and all the places I've visited.
All right. Tell me more about your time in Jordan then. If it was so great, why was it so great?
I guess mainly because my dad was very good friends with the king. And as a kid, I didn't really recognize that he was the king, and it didn't put it together. I just assumed he was some guy who my dad was really good friends with. But there were a lot of perks with it. We got to stay at his private beach resort in Aqaba, and he had jet skis. He had an inflatable trampoline in the water. We got to do banana boat rides, glass boat bottom rides. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. Yeah. So, hanging out with the king.
Yeah, hanging out with the king of that.
That's pretty cool. So you mentioned that you just kind of thought of it like, this is a nice guy that my dad is friends with. Did you know anything about your dad? Did you, suspect that he worked for some government agency?
I had no idea. I had no idea. I just assumed that we were living somewhere different, that my dad wanted a change of scenery. I really didn't put it together. My oldest brother might have, considering he was in high school at the time, and he had to have known something was going on.
So were there, signs, now that you look back, you can see
there were definitely signs. Looking back, there was one time where I had to spend 12 hours straight in the embassy, and I just assumed it was a day that we were just going to have fun, meet up with some family friends. But in reality, somebody had broken into our house and robbed my dad of $80,000 worth of valuables, and we couldn't go home until they found the person who'd done it.
All right.
I didn't really realize why somebody would steal from my dad until I found out that he was a CIA operative, and there's a lot of important stuff to steal from him.
Yeah. When did you find out your dad worked for the CIA, and how do you tell you? Hey kids, I have an announcement to make. I used to work for the CIA, or I worked for the CIA. And what was that like, learning that your dad was a CIA operative?
Well, I found out doing a project, actually. I really had never thought to question my dad about what he'd done until 5th grade, when I had to do a report on what your father does for a living. And I asked him what his occupation was during the time when we were living overseas, and he just said, I was a CIA operative, I was high up in the government, and I did a lot of undercover work. I was like, well, that's sort of interesting. I've no idea that was going on. So,
going back to your time in Jordan, being obviously an American, Caucasian American, you must have been a minority. I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
So, was that interesting at all? Or was that?
It was a very different experience. Unlike the way minorities are often treated in the United States, a lot of times Americans are seen as very, very graceful, very important people in the society.
Really?
And especially in Amman, Jordan, where we spent a lot of our time, all of the people were very respectful towards Americans because they respected our government, they respected democracy, they respected what we were trying to do for essentially the rest of the world.
I never would have imagined that.
Yeah, it's very different from what people usually think. We're imperialist scum trying to take over the world, but a lot of the work that the American government does is very good work, and it gets overlooked.
Well, good for the Jordanians.
Yeah, I know.
So this is moving kind of away from that. Looking at your future, you mentioned that you loved to living in Jordan was a great time.
Yeah.
Do you ever see yourself moving back there, or living overseas again, or working for the CIA, following in your father's footsteps? I don't know. Anything? What do you think?
I don't know if I would follow in my father's footsteps per se. That's not my cup of tea, I guess you would say.
Okay.
Yeah. Government agents aren't treated that well, and there's no perks to working in the government. Maybe a top secret classification or something, but other than that, there's not much. I might do a travel abroad. I don't know if I could see myself doing that, just because I'm not a fan of going to schools overseas. I could definitely see myself living in another place overseas, though.
All right.
Especially Amman or Egypt. Those places are just spectacular to live in.
So would you recommend someone like me to go check out Amman?
If you have never traveled to an exotic country, I would go to Amman or Egypt. They're the most amazing sights you will ever see in your life.
Really?
Yeah.
You heard it from the man himself, Alex Manners. Amman or Egypt? Straight from Alex Manners, son of a CIA operative.